Thank you very much. Actually, if there had been 5 days like this, I probably wouldn't have moved out of Seattle to go to Southern California. But primero, Rosa, su liderazgo muy importante. Felicitaciones. Muchas gracias. I thank Rosa for her leadership. It matters enormously. I'm very proud to have a person like that standing up for children here in the Seattle area. I want to thank you, Stan, for everything that you do. I'm very much honored and humbled to be here with you today and to share a little bit of time with you to celebrate your work, but to also be really clear that there is so much more ahead of us. Time is not our friend, and it's not on our side. The rights of youth are a very fragile thing, and not everyone is standing up for them, because so many I watch just simply sit down. In the short time that I have with you today, I'm going to remind us of the power of the small work inside of the big work. History that has paid off with perseverance and persistence. I want to talk about the courage that it takes to do this work publicly. And I want to talk about the power of collective action. Some of the work that we are working through in LA matters way beyond Los Angeles. And then I'm going to close with a very sobering reminder of the struggle that most of the youth in this country, in our large and small cities, exist, and the power of the act of collective action as we do that. I remind us that the difference between those who have their dreams fulfilled and those who have their dreams deferred is education. And in thinking through the power of simple acts, I'm going to remind us of a narrative. At 4:30 on the afternoon of Monday, February the 1st, 1960, 4 college students sat down at a lunch counter in a Woolworth department store in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were freshmen at North Carolina A&T, the black college a mile or so away. "I'd like a cup of coffee, please," said Ezel Blair to the waitress, one of the 4. "We don't serve Negroes here," she said. The Woolworth lunch counter was a long L-shaped bar that could seat 66 people, with a stand-up snack bar at one end where 4 could stand. The seats were for whites, and the snack bar was for blacks. Another employee, a black woman who had just finished the steam table, approached the students and tried to warn them, "You're acting stupid and ignorant." They didn't move. At about 5:30, the front doors of the store were closed, and the 4 still did not move. Finally, they left by the side door in the early evening, and outside a small crowd had gathered, including a reporter from the Greensboro Record. "We're going to be back tomorrow with all of A&T." The next morning, the protests had grown to 27 men and 4 women, most from the same dormitory. The men were in suits and ties, and they brought their schoolwork and sat at the counter. On Wednesday, students from Greensboro's Negro High School, Dudley, joined in, and the number of protesters swelled to 80. By Thursday, the number of protesters was 300, including women from the University of North Carolina. By Saturday, the sit-in had reached 600. People were spilling out into the streets, and white teenagers waving Confederate flags, throwing firecrackers as they were announced from the football team, "Here comes the wrecking crew." No one moved. By the following Monday, the sit-ins had spread to Winston-Salem, 25 miles away, Durham, 50 miles away. In Charlotte, the following Wednesday, St. Augustine College and Shaw University in Raleigh. By the following Thursday and Friday, the protests had crossed straight lines: Hampton and Portsmouth in Virginia, Rock Hill in South Carolina, Chattanooga, Tennessee. And by the end of the month, there were sit-ins throughout the entire West as far as Texas and the entire South. In his book, Dissent, Michael Walzer asked, "What did it feel like?" And the student said it felt like a fever. It was catching on. Some 70,000 students eventually took part. Thousands were arrested, and untold thousands more radicalized. These events in the early 60s became the beginning of the civil rights movement that engulfed the South and the rest of this nation for a decade. And every bit of it happened without a single email, a single text, a single Twitter posting, or a single Facebook. I want a cup of coffee. I want to go to a school. I want a diploma. We have watched in this country for more than 200 years to try to figure out, can students go to school in a school of their choice that is high quality? We have watched us try to desegregate schools. We have watched organizations like yourself try to get the opportunity for students to have a powerful education, as powerful as the most privileged white family in this country. Many times the courts have been our friends. Sometimes they have not. But perseverance has mattered. I think everybody in the room is familiar with the famous Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, where the man, some 29 years after the passage of the 14th Amendment, wouldn't give up his seat on a train in Louisiana. And the court case finally was handed down in an 8-1 decision. 8-1. The Supreme Court of the United States of this land, the ultimate manifestation of the rule of law, ruled against Plessy and began for more than 100 years the doctrine of separate but equal. And writing for the majority was Justice Henry Billings Brown, a white man educated at both Harvard and Yale, born in the northern slave-free state of Massachusetts. And in his writing, he reminded us that the object of the 14th Amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the equality of the two races before the law. But in the nature of things, it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color, or to endorse social as distinguished from political equality. If one race be inferior to the other socially, the Constitution of the United States can simply not put them on the same plane. That is what Plessy stood for. Now, there was a single dissenter in that case, Justice John Marshall Harlan, a white man born to a slave-holding family in Kentucky, educated at a public college, who went on to write that the white race is the dominant race in this country, and no doubt will be some for all time if it remains true to its great heritage and principles. But in the view of this Constitution and the eyes of the law, in this country, there is no superior dominant or ruling class of citizens. There is no caste system here. Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. And he goes on to write that the thin disguise of equal but separate accommodations will neither mislead anyone nor atone for the wrong of this day. Now, it will be his grandson who will sit on the Warren Court some 70 years later that will partake in the unanimous decision of Brown versus the Board of Education that will strike down Plessy. And we will have watched and continue to watch the struggle in this country to enact the promise of Brown. It happens all the time. Access is still an issue. I was, quite frankly, astonished with pride when I read about the decisions that you have helped shape in this state of Washington in the last 2 years. The notion that an accelerated academic program policy in 2013 would take place where students would automatically qualify for advanced courses. The fact that you would make computer science as an AP course an opportunity for students. The fact that we actually have to have that as a conversation is mind-boggling to me. That stand up the notion that parents have their university where you move not just around advocacy, but you move to agency. Incredibly powerful. You pass a 24 college credit-ready diploma. Unbelievable. Also unbelievable that we actually had to have that conversation. These are amazing tasks to pull off. And I don't know a single person in the room who isn't aware that there is a fight involved in that. And there is a consequence for leadership in those fights. I am struggling to try to make sense out of a state that would say it's okay to send money back to the federal government because poor youth don't actually need all of that money. It doesn't square with the youth I know. It didn't square with the youth I knew in Seattle when I lived here for a short time, and it sure as heck doesn't square with the tens of thousands of youth in Los Angeles. We too struggled in California for 3 years to try to get a waiver so that we could concentrate on the students in the greatest conditions of poverty. And the state couldn't get one. So I participated and led a group of 8 districts that fundamentally broke away from the state and got our own waiver as a group of districts. And we are trying to fundamentally have a different conversation about robust accountability. We didn't want a waiver from NCLB. We wanted a waiver to a more robust accountability system. And we are struggling with that as well. Don't give up. Don't give up. I want to talk a little bit about some very difficult work, but some very powerful work. I think there are lessons in here for us, but there are also some warnings in here. So don't do this. It's not for the faint of heart, but it matters enormously, just like the work that Stan does on a regular basis. When I came to LA 4 years ago, I got sued on a fairly regular basis, and they were for conditions that were fundamentally a violation of youth rights. We had a lawsuit called Reed, which basically said that when you lay off teachers because of their seniority, there are schools that serve the most impacted youth where the largest number of those students go to school, and therefore the youngest faculty are there. So we watched during the very difficult downturn in California, up to 70% of entire faculties wiped out. That was not happening in the West San Fernando Valley, one of the few places we have of privilege. So a lawsuit called Reed was filed, testified for 3 days on the stand, and the judge found a constitutional right to stability for the most impacted students. So we no longer lay off based on that. It is still it's still being appealed. We then determined that I got sued because we were not counting how well a student does as part of the evaluation of the adults in the system. Not the only measure, by no means, but certainly not no measure. I actually don't know another organization where the fundamental core of the organization is not counted in how well we do. I am sure that there are plenty of CEOs of the hospitals up on the Hill who are not sitting around the kitchen table and saying, you can judge us on anything you choose, talking to her or his board of directors about how well this hospital runs, except mortality rate. That is off the table. Of course not. You actually go to a hospital to get better. And how well that happens is a part, along with everything else. The South Lake Union Transit Company is not sitting around trying to judge its effectiveness by saying everything counts except the crash rates. No. You actually go public transportation, go from here to there without being hurt. It matters. Students come to school to know something that they did not know before and demonstrate they know that. Not just simply for that, so that they can graduate college and workforce ready. And that should count. And so a judge found out that it should have a portion in how well we do things. So today, we have an entirely different evaluation system for administrators, starting with myself, to teachers that we have put together that's remarkable, it's robust, it has multiple measures, and including how youth do over time in achievement. And it's still being appealed. And then in May of 2012, 9 students in California sued many people, including myself and the state, and it came to be known as the Vergara case. And the suit seeks to strike down a set of statutes that believe, in the eyes of these students, that the district is unable to prevent grossly ineffective teachers from being in front of students, but particularly students who live in circumstances of poverty. In short, the statutes were the permanent employment statute, where in California you get tenure in less than 2 years. The second was the dismissal statutes, 2 parts, how you dismiss teachers for gross malfeasance and immoral conduct, which is almost never. And then the fourth was LIFO, how you determine to have to lay someone off in the unbelievably difficult situation of a downturn in money by using only, and absolutely only, the day the teacher was hired. I agree that the challenge statutes, as they are called, cause harm. And they have caused harm for years to students. And I agree that there is a better and more responsible way to deal with the underlying circumstances for which these statutes are required. I agree that egregious and irreparable harm comes to youth, and no others in the system, when those statutes are applied according to the way the law is designed in California. In other words, I agree that the equal treatment of youth in unequal circumstances is not justice. I believe that teachers should have full protection and tenure after a reasonable period of time to determine if this teacher should be teaching. Not everyone should be teaching. I was a much better chemistry teacher 5 years than I was on my first day. and people took time back in the day in New York to find out if I was going to continue to get better. I believe it should be easier to fire teachers who commit egregious and criminal acts upon students, or who, after significant investment in their development, simply cannot help a child learn. And I believe that when we are forced by fiscal circumstances beyond our control, we honor the profession by taking into account all of the things that a teacher does, not simply the day they were hired. And licensure and credential isn't a proxy for competence, it's a precursor for competence. So when I was deposed in the case, which went on for 5 days in my deposition, and I stood trial for 4 days, I testified to such, and to the harm that the current statute cause, and the devastation I see when I am forced to follow these laws, which violate the rights of youth. I am absolutely convinced that the rights of adults, important and inviolate, can be and must coincide side by side with the exact same rights for youth. All means all in this country. It doesn't mean some. I want to share with you how I've come to think about this in terms of leadership. There are lots of ways that we can advance a youth's right agenda. But the way I think about that is that rights for students are a very precarious thing. They easily disappear. And if you have something precious, you put it in a box, which has 4 sides, and you protect it. And for me, that box is legislation, and it's regulation, and it's negotiation. And when all else fails, it's litigation. It's where we come to in this unbelievable country where we live under the rule of law to pray for redress when we have been aggrieved. So we have tried. We have tried in California to think about different ways in negotiations. I have 11 unions. I am negotiating every single day of my life. And we have made phenomenal progress, but not enough. If you think back to Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, if those who have heard and felt the stinging darts of segregation, you come to realize that wait almost always means never. Those words have not gone away for students who have no current documentation, who have no health care, who have no parents, who have no home, who have no roof, who have no money, who have no employment. Wait is not acceptable. So we've thought about the idea that you do all 4 at the same time. We have pushed to change laws, we have pushed to change contracts, we have pushed to change policies, and we have gone before the courts of this country and in this state of California and said, if it is not just, then it cannot stand for students. You know, I think about the acts of those children who came forward in Vergara, who've been on TV all the time, assailed, as well as the people who testified. And I'm struck because Bobby Kennedy is such a fixture in LA. The Ambassador Hotel, where he was struck down, is now a new school, 6 different schools on that property. And if you remember this quote, as I'm sure you will, each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lots of others or strikes out against an injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million centers of energy and daring, they build a current that can sweep down the mightiest wall of opposition or resistance. June 1966, South Africa. I say to myself, Jesus Christ, if we can end apartheid in South Africa, we can give every single kid in California a high-quality education. And this is the difficult part of the speech, and I'm not ashamed that sometimes it is emotional. But we don't, and I witness it on a daily basis. You can travel to 2 of my 1,019 schools in a car in an hour. You can go to Coliseum Elementary, or you can go to Hesby Oaks. Educational apartheid exists today. It is hard to imagine the difference between those 2 schools. The youth of LA are not some amorphous group of people. They're not faceless. Pre-K, K through 12, and adult ed, there's 909,000 people who go to school every day in LA. 87% of them live in a circumstance of poverty, and most of it unimaginable poverty. Most do not speak English as their first language. No one looks like me in Los Angeles in schools, or carries an invisible knapsack of privilege to their school daily. Most don't have health insurance. Most do not have current documentation in this country as a citizen, or access to dental, or even a roof over their head. And every single one of them wants to be you and me. They want to participate in this thing called the American dream. They want to graduate and go to post-secondary. They want a job with a living wage, and we will brook nothing that stands in their way. But that makes people uncomfortable, and you in this room know that. You want to understand discomfort? You can come with me to Huntington Park High School. I have 18,000 students in LA who are homeless, roofless. They live in parks, cars, under bridges. It is the weather as well, so it's a very public sense of homelessness. Or you can meet Fernando, who lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pacoima with 14 other people because they've all lost their houses. But Fernando, in 11 days, will graduate from North Hollywood High School and become the first in his family in 2014 to graduate from high school and will go on to college. Or you could have come with me 2 months ago in the Florence neighborhood, South Central to most of us, where, like most schools, you do a routine screening for dental care. And we did third graders, 3,000 kids. 127 had to be taken to a hospital for active open abscesses in their mouth. How does a third grader read and learn to read with an open abscess in their mouth, with no thought there's going to be dental care in that family whatsoever? We have schools for moms and pregnant young ladies. No one ever leaves school just because you have a baby anymore, and for their significant others. And last year I did a graduation speech, one of the many at that school. And it was an amazing experience. There were 14 gals around the table, and I wanted to meet them so I could make my talk personal. And I remember sitting and listening to their stories, and as you might imagine, it was quite emotional. And then some girl said something, and I said, could you all answer that question? And it was arresting. In the United States of America in 2013, not a single one had been to an OBGYN except to the day they had had their child. Now that is discomfort. I am convinced that through collective action, we can make a difference in this country. You can make a difference even more so in Washington, and the kids are counting on us. Now there's critics. Some are loud, some are shrill, some thoughtful, some silent, and some said that we're about attacking teachers' rights. Quite the opposite. Nothing in the Vergara case was an attack on teachers' rights whatsoever. Teachers should and do have rights inside the state constitution, inside of the federal constitution, through FERPA, through HIPAA, through bargain labor agreements, and I could go on and on. I just can't find any for youth in that list. Others say that we wanted to get rid of tenure. Not at all. We just simply wanted more than 18 months to determine if a person should be in front of Maria for the rest of their life. We also said that people criticized this because when we talked about last in, first out, how could we possibly think of doing anything other than your seniority date? It is the only completely non-objective data point. That's absurd. Why don't we use teacher height? It is completely objective. It's very visible. No one can judge differently about that. And when I make the comment, people chuckle like that. I'm like, it's the same thing. It is the exact same thing. Actually, everything that teachers do in unimaginably punishing circumstances, that matters. That matters for students, and that should count. And some have criticized that it's all about a bunch of billionaires who are using their money to change laws. And I say myself about this, that amount of money in the Vergara case doesn't come close to 10 years worth of dues, which are collected to do exactly the same thing. People do spend money to advocate for a position. Great. That is the way it should be, not just for one side, however. The second part of that letter from a Birmingham jail, about 10 paragraphs in, King reminds us that we've waited 350 years for our God-given rights, and the nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed. But here in America, we're moving at a horse and buggy pace, is gaining so much as a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. It's not necessarily a cup of coffee at a lunch counter any longer. The cup of coffee is a diploma. The cup of coffee is true access to the American dream. I and you are not confused about our mission. We lift youth out of poverty every single day, and we will use all means granted to us in this republic to do that on behalf of the other. You know, last Friday, like I do on so many days, I visited a school. And I visited Nevin Elementary School. This is typical elementary school in LAUSD. 100% of the youth live in circumstances of poverty, and watching the normal dismissal, you see the kids getting ready to go, and the teachers are shoving into the backpack the weekend update, reminding them of their homework, and then every single kid leaves through the gym. And when they leave through the gym, they're given 2 bags in each hand of groceries so that family can eat till they come back to school on Monday. This is a typical event. And I say to myself, my God, I hear critics really loud, and I think about that. And one of the ones that's particularly loud in LA is a woman by the name of Diane Ravitch. And what I say to myself is, I can hear much better if you could just work one day in LA. Then I think I could hear. But absent that sweat equity for the other, I'm sorry, I don't have the time. I said at the beginning, time is not our friend, and it's not on our side. You remember the phrase I began with this: we have no caste system in this country. The Constitution is colorblind when it comes to the rights of its citizens. I thank you, Justice Harlan, but I have to say, seriously, we haven't gotten there yet. So I humbly demand of myself and of you to stand taller, to stand firmer, with unapologetic conviction for the rights of students. Because if not you, who? It has to be you. And I thank you for it, and I thank you for continuing. Nice job, Stan. Enjoy.